Hey, good morning. It's Pastor Jeff with your Sunday morning message. Thank you so much for tuning in with us here at Freedom Church. As human beings, we have a habit of making everything about us. And this is the side effect of our consciousness residing inside of our brains. If we're completely honest, making everything about us in certain ways feels good for short periods of time. It feels good to think that everything that's good that has happened in your life is because you are good. You're this amazingly good person, and so you deserve good things. But the price you pay for that process is of making those good experiences about you is that you make the bad experiences about you as well. And you start to interpret all of the bad things in your life as things that you deserve. And as a result, you place yourself on a self-esteem roller coaster where your self-worth makes you a prisoner of the moment. And when people criticize you or reject you, it likely has a lot more to do with them, their values, their priorities, their life situation than it has to do with you. So make sure you leave the room before you react to an attack, because you need to understand people are going through stuff. And sometimes we react without thinking about the big picture. And I hate to break it to you, but other people simply don't think about you nearly as much as you think that they do, because they're busy thinking about themselves. So when something you do fails, it doesn't mean you're a failure as a person. It simply means you are a person who happens to fail, which simply makes you in that moment human, which after all, that's what you are. Meekness is having good conversations and asking good questions. It's speaking to hear and not to be heard. It's realizing good conversations are an opportunity to share your views on life. It's realizing some conversations use emotion and some use logic. Someone wanting to vent to you isn't necessarily looking for logical answers. And someone looking for logic doesn't want someone that's just going to listen. Meekness is knowing your role. When I do marriage counseling, I am hoping to facilitate conversations so that their conversations throughout the rest of the week are better. When I preach, I see myself as an MC. My hope is to facilitate better conversations between you and God through the rest of the week. Meekness is actually power under constraint. It means I know who is in charge and I don't have to seek revenge. Matthew 5:4 is what we're looking at today. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Inherit the earth. What the actual meaning here is, blessed are those who are meek, because they will be rich in life. Not rich, but rich in life. In the Greek and in the Hebrew, meekness is actually defined as strength under control. It's realizing you don't have to react to everything, and it's pairing humility and good judgment with a kingdom mindset. It's looking at the big picture at the expense of your own interests in that moment. And I want to look at some descriptions of meekness. First, in Ephesians chapter 4, verses 1 through 6, I, therefore, a prisoner of the Lord, urge you to walk in a manner worthy of the calling to which you have been called, with all humility and gentleness, with patience, bearing with one another in love, eager to maintain the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. There is one body and one Spirit, just as you were called to the one hope that belongs to your call. One Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father over all, who is over all and through all and in all. Looking at how Paul describes himself as a prisoner for God is the ultimate picture of meekness. He's urging us to walk in a way that is worthy of what God has called us to be. If anybody ever knew what meekness was, it was Paul. He was beaten. He was imprisoned. He was mocked constantly. So people would say, that's not meekness. Yes, it is, because he didn't fight it. And he didn't defend himself. He defended the gospel. And he starts out with humility. Meekness is full of humility. And humility is not thinking less of yourself. And it isn't thinking more highly of others. It's the freedom of thinking of yourself at all. Meekness takes humility a little farther by making it about unity as a whole. It's, if I say this, if I do this, what will it do for humility in this setting? Another group of verses that Jesus addresses this later on in Matthew chapter 7. He says, judge not that you be not judged. For with the judgment you pronounce, you will be judged, and with the measure you use it will be measured to you. Why do you see the speck that is in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log that is in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, when there's the log in your own eye? You hypocrite. First, take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye. When we see these verses and believe it says not to judge, it actually warns us that when you judge, because you're going to be judged the same way. So walk in humility. But Jesus takes it a little bit further. He says, why do you see the speck in your brother's eye, but not notice the log in your own eye? One, this is perspective. Things are larger in our life and should appear larger for us than they do for others. My speck looks like a log to me, and yours should look huge to you because they're in our line of sight. But he closes it out by saying, take the log out of your own eye so that you can see clearly to get the speck out of your brother's eye. Listen. Do you know what it truly takes to get a log out of your eye? It takes building relationships with people who see things differently from you. Meekness is fully operating with people who don't have the same views as you. You see, we want to surround ourselves with people who see everything the same way we do. But the truth is, when you get to a certain point, things are going along perfectly, and if there's no difference in opinion in a church, in an organization, or in any type of setting, there's only one person thinking. And if there's only one person thinking, there can be no growth. Paul goes on to say, bearing with one another in love. Bearing with one another is walking together and doing life together, maybe even with people you don't even completely get along with. Because you're eager to maintain unity. This is a big picture mentality. There are times where we need to take a stand, and there are times where we can sit quietly, allowing God to work and make sure we don't disrupt the unity of what God is doing. Probably the best place to begin looking at these verses is in Psalm 37, verse 11. It says, the meek shall possess the land and delight themselves in abundant prosperity. In the Greek Old Testament, the words of Psalm 37:11 are almost identical with what is said in Matthew 5:5. The meek shall inherit the land. And the word for land in Greek and Hebrew also means earth. So let's try to see what meekness means in Psalms and what it has to do with God. Notice the parallel between verse 11 and verse 9. Verse 11 says, the meek shall possess the land. Verse 9 says, those who wait for the Lord shall possess the land. So I would conclude that meek people wait for God. What does it mean to wait for God, though? We get a picture of those who wait for the Lord, who are meek, if we look at verses 5-8. Commit your way to the Lord, trust in him, and he will act. He will bring forth your vindication as the light and your right as the noonday. Your night as the noonday. Be still before the Lord and wait patiently for him. Fret not yourself over him who prospers in his way, over the man who carries out evil devices. Refrain from anger, forsake wrath. Worry not for yourself. It leads only to evil. This paints a very good picture of what meek people look like. First, they trust God. Meek people begin by trusting God. They believe that he will work for them and vindicate them when others oppose them. Biblical meekness is rooted in the deep confidence that God is for you and never against you. The second portrait of meekness, these people commit their ways to God. The Hebrew word for commit means literally to roll. Meek people have discovered that God is trustworthy, and so they roll their way, their business, their problems, their relationships, their health, their fears, their frustrations, their worries. They roll it all onto God. And they admit that they are insufficient to cope with the complexities and the pressures and the obstacles that life brings their way. And they trust that God is able and willing to sustain them and guide them and protect them. Thirdly, people who are meek are quiet before God and they wait for him. Verse 7 of the verses we were just looking at in Psalm 37, meek people are quiet or still before the Lord and wait patiently for him. First, they discover that God can be trusted. Second, they commit their way to him. And then third, they wait patiently in stillness for God to work. This doesn't mean they become lazy. It means that they're free of frenzy, free of chaos, of running around wondering what to do. They have a kind of steady calm that comes from knowing that God is omnipotent, that he has their affairs under his control, and that he is gracious and will work everything out for the best. Meek people have a quiet steadiness about their lives in the midst of major upheavals. Second or fourthly, they don't fret over the wicked. As verse 8 says, they refrain from anger. Their family and work and life are in God's hands. They trust him. They wait patiently and quietly to see how his power and goodness will work things out. And so the setbacks and the obstacles and the opponents of life do not produce the kind of bitterness and anger and fretfulness that is so common among men. So the portrait we have of meekness so far, based on the closest parallel of the Sermon on the Mount and Psalm 37:11, is that it begins by trusting God. Then it commits its way to God in full confidence. Then it waits patiently and quietly for the outcomes. And finally, it does not give way to anger and fretfulness when faced with it. Finally, those who are meek are dangerous and competent people. Here's the truth about meekness. It is our job as humans to develop into dangerous and competent, powerful people. You should be capable, but your trust in God should stop you from having to do it. A very gentle example. When I first started driving our GTO Nightmare, that PJ drag race, the Alexa drag race, and then PJ drag race, when I first started driving it around town some, because of the dark tinted windows, people probably assumed PJ was in the car. I can't tell you how many times I pulled up to traffic lights, someone pulled up alongside me and would start revving up the engine and try to get me to race them. 9 times out of 10, I would look up and it was some big pickup truck or SUV or something that I absolutely know has no chance against the GTO. I would simply kind of smile, watch them just tear out down the road. I had nothing to prove there. Nothing to gain by outrunning whatever it was. Meekness is that moment where something happens. You know you have the power to destroy whatever is in your way, but you choose not to do it. Think about that time you were so close to absolutely losing your cool, but you didn't. Be still and know that I am God, and blessed are the meek. That's what it's about, being a impactful Christian. It's not about being weak and helpless and somehow becoming good It's about having the ability, excuse me, and the power and the mindset to be extremely dangerous while having the self-control to not do the damage that we so often want to do. Blessed are those who could take on the world, storm into battle, and win, but instead decide to wait on God. Blessed are the meek. In those days, in biblical times, when they trained a horse for war, when it was ready for war, they called it meek. They were saying when it was being trained, it was being meeked. And what that meant was that horse was being readied for battle, and it was not ready until it could charge into battle, doing exactly what its rider was telling it to do, following its guidance and leadership. It could storm into war without any skittishness, without any fear, and without reacting to noises and attacks and things going on. It simply followed the direction of its rider. When we master meekness, we are ready to charge into any and all situations without feeling the need to react to every attack. We see the big picture and realize that a reaction in that setting may damage God's work in a totally different setting. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. The good life, we said blessed is the good life. If you want to live the good life, you remember who's in charge. You become dangerous, you become competent, you become powerful, and you very rarely use it because you trust God in all and every situation. Have a great day and God bless.